Pruning and the Meaning of Life is what this is titled, which it really isn't, but it's something we have to do. And you know, in our modern yards and things, it's something almost everybody must do, or you're going to get overrun if you love plants and trees at all, because everybody wants to plant 500 things and there's room for about 50. And some of the reasons that we do our pruning: to promote flowering, and also fruit, of course. Those are both pictures from my yard. That's my gold medallion tree. And the right is one of the 2 new low-chill cherries. And they do work here very well. Mini Royal and Royal Lee. You can recommend those to people right up pretty much close to the water. This year, not sure how I'm going to do with them. I have killed 2 pairs of them from crown rot. And so I'm planting them on a little mound this year. We're going to see if we can't not crown rot them. But in the meantime, before they crown rotted, that was 2 years ago. And planted 2 to a hole in less than 6 feet. I got about 2 pounds off of each tree in there, only their 3rd year. So those do work here very well. We found that's kind of like the holy grail of fruit. We could have all the other varieties, but nobody had low-chill cherries until 4 years ago was when Dave Wilson, 5 years ago was when they introduced them. So those do work here really well. But they do need pruning, depending on the situation, of course, and where do you start? Other ways that we do pruning is to, of course, what I talked about was size control, not letting things get out of hand. That's a Dave Wilson photo on the right. That's Chris Terry doing summer pruning. That's that famous Santa Rosa plum he was showing you, and that was when Chris first started, so that was his year to prune the tree. And then, of course, on the left, to take and make use of space that in a normal conventional sense doesn't have room to grow fruit trees, but with espalier and some determination, you can turn blank walls into, you know, fruiting canvases very easily. It just takes time and detail. And espalier, as far as a pruning style, kind of requires you to do little gentle pruning throughout the season, not only during the bare root season, but you'll need to sort of nip and tuck, and it is labor intensive. But it can sure make good use of otherwise blank, boring walls, or, you know, for the longest time, my theory was that if it was in my yard and I couldn't eat it, I should kill it and plant something there that I could eat. But I have a rose garden, you know, so it's not all that way. But that's how you make use of some good space there. And you can espalier some non-traditional things. When espalier is talked about, usually the first things that get mentioned are pears and apples, because they're spur fruiting. And if you remember the spur fruiting types, the spur develops, and depending on the species, will live anywhere from 3 to as much as 15 or 18 years or more, and bear fruit at that same spot if it's manicured and taken care of very well. One of your former, well, she's still a master gardener, several of you I'm sure know Jackie Seidman. Jackie took I should have put that in this thing. Oh well, I'll do better next time. Jackie espaliered an apricot. And apricots tend to fruit on year-old wood very heavily, but they also develop a spur, sort of erratically and without much, I don't think, any rhyme or reason, depending on the pruning you do. The spur only lives about 3 years, but Jackie stuck it against a wall. It was only 4 feet tall, and several years, that little 7 or 8 foot long canopy was able to produce 10 or 15 pounds of fruit a couple of times when things really went well. It was a gold-kissed apricot. So you may be able to buck convention, because a lot of what we read, even like the handouts that I have for you there, especially the UC A&R handouts, those were produced, I think, in the 80s. The information's still good and still true about how to prune deciduous fruit trees, because we all know that nothing's changed. Peaches still fruit on year-old wood, and so do nectarines. Plums fruit on spurs best, and don't produce very good fruit on 1-year-old wood. So you should sort of eliminate that, especially if size is an issue. But you don't have to stick to the rules necessarily, and that's how these things get challenged. It was Paul Thompson and John Riley in 1968 founded an organization called the California Rare Fruit Growers, and John lived in Santa Clara and planted a jaboticaba. Some of you might know what that is, a Brazilian fruiting tree. And people said, you can't grow that there. Well, the thing the tree's still alive or not. John's passed away, but the thing was, growing just fine in Santa Clara. It was technically a subtropical fruit tree, but it happened to be a very tough one. And Paul Thompson down here planted bananas all over the place and planted acreage of mangoes, and everybody said, you can't grow that here. Well, as we all know, yes you can if you do things right and have the right climate, the right microclimate. So, experimentation or the necessity of mother of invention is something that, has led to people challenging those things. So don't be afraid to try a little bit of it yourself. That's how you learn. And, I'm not afraid to tell people I killed those cherries. Well, they died on me. I have stuff that dies. Even the arborist who's done it for 30 years learns by experimentation. Well, anyway, when we talk about pruning, there's some basic principles, and most of the pruning that we do ends up involving broadleaf vascular plants and trees that have a cambium and a xylem and a phloem. And so pruning standards have been developed or been in use for sometimes thousands of years. But in the last 30 years or so, real attention has been focused by arborists and other things to get people to prune properly. Because we've learned that, just because you prune doesn't mean you're helping that tree or that plant out. And you learn a little bit about some of the biology and the key terms like you always do. On that slide, there's branch bark ridge and our branch collar. And we now know through research that's been done here in the last few years is that you need to prune outside that branch bark collar. Too many people for too many years flush cut things right next to the trunk and encouraged decay in a tree and shortened its lifespan because of improper technique. And again, what they used to tell you was follow the collar, but now we say go through the shortest distance through the wood outside of the branch bark collar, because you're better off making a small wound than a big one. Big wounds take longer to heal, and especially torn wounds don't heal well at all. One of the trees I've got out there that we'll be working on got evidence of a big old tear that happened in the nursery, and the defect is still there, and it's probably why the tree hasn't sold yet. It's a beautiful peach, it's got flowers all over it, but a big gouge in the trunk is kind of a structural no-no. But you just need to get familiar with some of that basic terminology, because I've got a slide here that, just basically you want to go in knowing why you're pruning, have the objective in mind, and then what you are pruning, because there are some specifics that we talked about, the fruiting things, a certain kind of fruiting wood, and those things. So if you just do a little bit of research, even if it's an odd, obscure plant, you can usually find some correct info about the habit of the plant, where it fruits, where it flowers, and what you're trying to do with it. You can also, if you don't know what you're doing, you can have stuff like this happen. That is my next door neighbor. Bless her heart, she's 96. She has paid somebody good money, a guy who is, quote, a tree service, to come do this. I've been in the house 17 years. 17 years somebody has showed up and knuckle pruned that poor avocado. And it's a huge, the tree is over 50 years old. It's in her lawn, and she doesn't use it as a fruiting tree. So in her case, she's not interested in the fruit. It's a seedling from a Fuerte next door, right next door, my other neighbor, and the tree fruits very well. Hers, not a fruit. Not a fruit in 17 years that I've been there, and there probably has never been a fruit on it. It may be even self-sterile. But they pay good money to have that kind of terrible stuff done. And that just encourages rot, because that is a bad version of what sometimes is called pollarding. And when you do that to a tree, and some people, here's where a technique we know is detrimental is used a lot. Because people like the aesthetic effect. They want that tree to look that way. Mulberries are another one that just get eviscerated almost to nothing. But the problem being, this tree is put up with it, although there's a couple of holes up in there. I've never even climbed the tree to look, but I can see them from my side of the fence that you can shove your fist into. Because decay has started where that callus tissue has grown over and over and over again. But again, that's a technique of pruning that is used to a lot of cases, fit things in a certain situation, but there are trade-offs. It definitely shortens the life of that tree. And, but there's one thing that humans develop that's, we do it because we like the end aesthetic result. We know that from research that it's really kind of detrimental. But when you have trees in the built environment, that's part of what gets done sometimes, sadly. And this guy's not a certified arborist. I don't even know if I've seen a license, contractor's license number on his truck. That's also the other sad truth about the industry of arboriculture. We who are ISA, the International Society of Arboriculture members and certified arborists, we care about doing the right thing for trees and we keep on learning every day that we're an arborist. And then you have a ton of people who will come by because the industry isn't legally regulated, that any idiot with a chainsaw and a truck can come and say, hey, I'll prune your tree. Or I used to hear this all the time. My own version of the helpline was a phone at Pacific Tree Farms, Walter Anderson's, and I'd hear this, can you recommend a good tree service? I let my gardener prune my tree. And I was like, why would you do that? Most of the gardeners really don't have a whole lot of training and education. I as a certified arborist am required to do CEU hours, so if things change through research, I'm on the cutting edge of proper tree care and always getting updates as to what does and doesn't work. But again, unregulated, unlicensed, they sure are cheap. And then the other downside to that fact is that if they hurt themselves on your property in our lovely state, they can sue you. So if you do this for yourself or recommend for anybody else, make sure if somebody's recommending a tree firm that they asked for the certificate of insurance, state contractor's license, and the liability insurance, and also the workers' comp. And that way you're covered, and so are they. It's just, it pays to do that. And no matter how cheap the other work may be, oftentimes that's what you get for your money. And the ISA and we arborists spend tons of time trying to teach people that that's not the proper way to prune a tree in most cases. And if you go in to do pruning, you can look and say, well, we've got a deciduous tree here, obviously, and we need to do some thinning because it's getting too dense in there. We have some crossing limbs. But again, oftentimes what gets done at the lowball rate is this kind of nonsense that then leads to this look, what we call almost a lion tail look, and you end up with a tree that then requires more pruning to fix the improper pruning that was done in the first place. The tree here, has some issues, but this is beautiful. That is a disaster. And then you have to spend more money, good money after bad, trying to fix the problem. Or again, the tree fails and prematurely, and people were left out on their trees. Information on the internet, there's a ton of it. If you stick with reasonable and reliable sources, university like A&R has vetted research material. So do most of the other major universities around the country. Cornell, those places, they have a lot of stuff on the web about tree care. Just watch the source sometimes, because sometimes you can get somebody who's got other issues on their agenda and doesn't have really vetted material. So if you're in the business or you're manning the hotline, and it's your job to refer, make sure you get credible sources. And as I say on the bottom there really aren't too many real absolutes in pruning, but as long as whoever's doing the pruning, there could be 3 ways to tackle a certain kind of tree and prune it. As long as you use sound logic, principles like branch collar, branch bark ridge, we call that target pruning. You use those methodologies to arrive at what I'm going to prune. You and the person next to you may arrive, I'm going to cut that branch, I'm going to cut this branch, and we're going to do that a little later. We're going to go by committee kind of around and talk of the examples I brought. But as long as sound logic is used, there isn't really any absolute right answer. Pruning is very subjective. It's subjective in the goal, depending on what they want, or if you're doing it for your own, what do you want? And someone may use a totally different strategy to accomplish the same end result, but you just use, again, sound logic and good, arboricultural principles, and you really shouldn't ever get in trouble. The one thing I will say though, as a 30-year fruit tree pruner, I've always made sure I told everybody that, you know, just because I prune this, I'm doing my part. But your tree, I can't guarantee that it's going to have a crop next year. And, you know, explaining things like chill hours and those sorts of things is usually a good preemptive before somebody expects that, you know, because I paid money, it's going to, you know, rain, you know, apricots next summer. And, you know, you can only do what you can do. Your only control is, you know, structure, sound structure, good branches, good position, enough air and light circulation, and the rest is up to the care of the owner. And a lot of folks don't water terribly well, or, you know, just kind of do it haphazardly. So always sort of, that's the old CYA or CYB, cover your behind warning for the day, because you prune my, I heard that a couple of times, and oh man, I'm not God, I'm just an arborist. Good books and things on the subject. The ISA that I belong to has tons of stuff that the public can buy. Some of it really ain't cheap, but it's really good information about technical material. There's DVDs and CDs, hours of them, and lots of good books on the subject. There are, what's kind of sad is that in print anymore, you know, books don't stay in actual published form hardly at all unless they're a textbook anymore. The window is very, very short, and there are some very good things that were done a long time ago, old books that you know, are treasures in my library that I'm glad I have, because they're no longer available. But there are good ones out there. The ISA material, like I said, that's world vetted. That's worldwide arborists and academicians, you know, contributing to the knowledge that's there, so you know you're safe with it. And I've got the ISA's email up at the back end of this presentation. And on the right, oh, rats, go back there. On the right there, this is basically an illustrated guide to pruning, the 3rd edition, Edward F. Gilman. Remember that name. If you see something on the web and it's Dr. Ed Gilman, University of Florida, Gainesville, I think. Ed's done tons of research in the last 30 years about challenging a bunch of the assumptions that were made about how trees grew and what they did. And some of the results were really, really eye-opening. And, you know, people like him were the ones that challenged the, well, you know, you need to cover your pruning wounds with a sealant. Well, you guys all know, I think, no sealant has ever been found to benefit any tree or shrub and help the wound close any more quickly than the plant or tree can close it by itself. However, there is couple of exceptions. When you use latex products, there's a really good one that Frizzy Paints makes called Tree Trunk White. It's latex with all the VOCs out of it, or it has almost none. I told a client, customer of mine, yeah, go, you know, call Frizzy at the store and go see if you pick a gallon up. He's putting in 300 fruit trees at his place in Alpine. And I said, Greg, you can use this. You need this stuff. He calls him and Frizzy says, we're not making it anymore. I was like, there are quarts of it available on the shelf at Walter Anderson's in Point Loma that I made them bring in there and keep, but I'm not sure how much longer the supply is going to last. But that stuff is latex you can put on, and I love it, especially when we talk about the fruit trees. Summer sunburn is a big issue. You've got to watch out for it. Even me on the coast in Chula Vista, I had my showy flowers peach sunburned terribly and blistered open the branching and covered it up with the latex, and I keep it covered, but sun scald is a very real problem here, even close to the coast. Certain trees are more susceptible to it than others, but that latex, the other thing it's good for is when you prune roses, there's an evil thing called the rose cane borer that after you cut your canes back, drills in and kills the cane. One little dab of that latex and no rose cane borers, no pesticide required. They just won't eat through the latex. And another situation where I use that product is if I prune for somebody and I open a wound up on a tree that I know is going to take more than 1 season to heal, I latex it and I ask them to keep it covered, because sadly sometimes you do have to take big limbs out of old trees, but that large limb can take an inordinately long period of time to heal, and in some cases, if the tree is, you know, an octogenarian or older, sometimes that wound might never heal. And the latex is there as a deterrent. because that wood, once the surface dries out, tastes the same to termite, powder post beetles, every other wood-eating beetle you can think of, and they'll drill into the wound and eat it. But with the latex there, it's a nice deterrent. I don't think I've ever had damage on any of my customers' trees that had those wounds that I unfortunately had to make. We kept it latexed, and there was never any termite invasion. But I've pruned and gone to people's houses where, you know, termites have gotten into large avocados through the wounds, and sometimes through root rot. Subterranean termites have gotten in through, and suddenly people don't know that they're there, and 10 years later the trunk starts to hollow out, and basically the tree collapses and dies, and they had no idea they had a termite colony occupying the heartwood of the trunk for 10 or 15 years. So, but anyway, at least above ground, a little bit of that nice, and if you probably go to even Home Depot or someplace like that, ask for as organic a white latex as you can get. If it's really thick, you might thin it with a little bit more water, but as an all-purpose whitewash and let's not invite termites into my plum tree kind of deterrent, good product. Anyway, let's see here. And again, we talked about, you read about all this stuff, and you look at all the books, and I've had people who, I didn't put it up here, I should have put the shot up, How to Prune Fruit Trees by Sanford Martin. It's been around a bazillion years. It's a $6 book. Walter Anderson bought the rights to it because it went out of print. And it was sad. And the deal is, it talks about all kinds of fruit trees and how they fruit. I've had tons of people say that they could read all about it, and they walk out to their tree, they're just dumbstruck or intimidated by the size of the tree, and they don't know where to begin. So, he said you can read all about it, but I'm the guy who's big on let's practice it. And, I'm going to bring in and we're going to practice a little. I wish we could do more with this class. In the future, I hope we can do more, really go to a place and do some pruning in the future. I have an orchard at a nonprofit farm in National City, a place called the Stein Historic Farm. It's open on Saturdays for 5 hours. Docents run the place. I've been teaching a pruning seminar once a year there for the last 5 years, and we'll do it again in perpetuity, I hope, because we took out and replaced most of the orchard, which was borer damaged and heart rotted, and Tom Spellman donated 40 trees to replant the orchard. So the orchard's up and running, and we have some young trees, and they've had trees there. There's an apple that's probably 30 years old, so you get to work on a lot of different fruit. That is open to the public now, but next year we may arrange for the next class, sorry guys, to have a field trip to the site. But you can always come to the seminar. It used to be for arborists and professionals only, but I've opened it up now to the general public because people want to learn how to do it too in their own backyards. There's a hand up.
What's the name of it again?
The Stein Family Farm, and you can find them. They do have a little web page, and like I said, they're only open on Saturdays. 5 hours or so, but we struck up an agreement. They love that we come and prune their fruit trees for them, and it's a living lab, so we always have to tell people, don't freak out about making a mistake. It's how you learn, it's there. And we actually the trees were planted by a bunch of UCSD grad students who did it kind of wrong, which is really cool, because there's all these mistakes out there that I get to show people. Because if everything's done perfect, what do you learn? And that's why some of the trees I brought in are on the ugly duckling side, because that's how you learn. So anyway, Stein Farm, really cool thing we got going there. Hope you can come at some point. And the other deal is too, this other slide here, this guy's out pruning, and there's it's pruning by committee there. He's up on the ladder, poor guy. And everybody else all the ladies are bossing him around telling him what to do. But that's the thing. He's up there saying, probably right where his hand is, you see there's 2 trunks there. Really narrow across. He's going around and probably, what do we do about this? That's really how the other half of your brain takes and stores the knowledge from just reading it. You're actually in the process out there, participating and doing it. So anyway, that's I've always been a very much hands-on guy, and have tried to teach other people what I know all these years, and still learn something every day. You know, again, as I said, you gotta watch out letting people who don't have any training loose on your trees and shrubs. You know, things will get cut into nice round cubes. You know, I've seen lots of rectangles out of shrubs that really didn't want to be grown that way, but that's how the gardener knew how to prune it, because he just watched some other guy do the same thing. So, again, it's about taking the time to study, learn, and remove. And there's one little thing. This is kind of a, remove up to 25% of the crown. That's sort of a thing you'll find when professionals come to prune for you. They'll say, well, we'll thin it 10 or 15%, but much above 25%, even in the dormant state, it's a little severe, can stress out the tree. So doing things in stages is you know, something that should be done, and with respect to the plant and allowing it to recover, because as Tom Spellman said earlier, in that 1-4 in a hole that they let get way big, and then they hacked them all back and started them over. One of the trees didn't survive, and that is the risk in an excessively pruned tree, is that it may not leaf out. And if it's a stone fruit, after doing this all these years, if you get more than 25 years out of a peach, nectarine, plum, or apricot, all of those prunus, in this climate, you're beating the average, because most people's trees begin to decline and die in that time frame, suffer from, usually in our clay soils at some point, drowning, you know, even if it was, you know, irrigation system caused, or for instance, winter like 2005, you had 22 inches of rain. I had people that would come to nursery and say, I'm turning my sprinklers back on, and they live in Claremont, nasty clay. I was like, are you out of your mind? I said, maybe if you just planted some things, go water them. But the trees below soil at 2 feet were sitting in a swamp that lasted, in some cases, we dug things out in June. And the last heavy rain was like late March, early April. We had things that were still swamp below ground 3.5 to 4 months afterwards. So, you know, even with the best of intentions and the best of irrigation systems, those trees start to decline. And you start to see stained wood when you do your pruning. That's a sign that you probably have some form of decay in there. Now, that being said, I had a customer that had a Santa Rosa plum that had all kinds of dieback. It was 25 when I started working on it. I worked on it for a decade. And it had bracts and a conch that came out on the trunk. Well, before that happened, I had cut the tree back and added 3 pluots to it for her, because she didn't want bazillion tons of fruit all at once. She wanted to spread out the season. So I grafted early and late season things on. That thing lived with those grafts for another 9 years with that heart rot decay before it collapsed. So it is basically a, you know, terminal situation, but a lot of times, I always tell people, it really takes a lot to kill a tree or a well-established, you know, woody shrub. And they don't die overnight unless you just stuck them in the ground and you don't water them. They have, you know, a will to live. And it's amazing how tough things really, really are. Did I see a hand back? Yes, ma'am.
Relative to training, how many SDG folks are arborists?
Okay, good. Oh, great question. Because here as a certified arborist, I'll stand up and defend them. Well, here's the one thing though. We have standards and guidelines, and that's all they are as to how proper pruning is to be done. But because of the right of the public to have electricity, or for the good of everybody, they're allowed to basically throw most of the rules out the window, because what they're trying to do is prevent an outage, or worse yet, a fatality from a tree arcing, and or tree workers getting killed doing that work. And no, if you're a tree care company, you can't just go work. There's a law. If it's closer than 10 feet, you have to be utility certified arborist, and they have special training in electricity, and they're allowed to get closer and do things. If it's on your property, I always tell people, be preemptive and hire a good quality company out there that can oftentimes prune around power lines, especially on big old trees that you're fond of, that you don't want to die or don't want to give up. They can actually engineer it and work through them in some cases. Some cases they cannot, but again, for the public good, within 10 feet, they'll cut it back to 10 foot away, and that's their obligation to SDG&E to keep the power provided to you. So if you have those situations, or people call you on the helpline and they're wondering what to do, contact, I'll give you a number here at the end for my PTCA is what it's called, Professional Tree Care Association of San Diego. All the member companies there are licensed, bonded, insured, they have certified arborist and a thing called a certified tree worker. But if it's closer than 10 feet, you're going to need to get one that has a little thing that says utility specialist, because they're the only companies that are allowed to work on that. And again, you probably have uncertified, unlicensed people saying, you know, I'll go up and prune that. Don't you dare let them. Don't let those people get near those energized lines. And I mean, your cable and the phone line is not high voltage. That's low voltage. Anything above it, that 1,000 watt that comes in as the service to your house, even that is problematic. And here's the thing. People don't really know this. You can call SDG&E. If you call them about a week before you're going to have a company come trim a tree, and that line that goes services your house, they'll come do a line drop. They'll turn it off and lower it in the morning, and then when the work's done, the pruning one's done, they'll put it back up. You can request that. There's no charge for that sort of thing. Because believe it or not, as much as people are not fond of SDG&E, they really want to do the right thing. They don't want anybody to get electrocuted. You know, they want to make sure your power stays on so that you run the kilowatt hour to make money. Their intentions are good. And they have area foresters who, it's their job to make sure that tree work gets done so the power lines coming in are cleared and that everybody's, internet and things aren't interrupted. But be proactive and tell the people if they call to do that, and call the PTCA for a referral. Because if you call the PTCA, they'll ask you what area. The administrator, Yolanda, will get back to you with 3 companies that work in your area that you can call for bids. And most of them will come out and give a bid for work free of charge. But if you do call and it's high voltage, the tree's up in the upper tier lines, it's going to have to be a utility specialist company that is licensed and trained to work around that high voltage electricity.
Does that include torrey pines?
Yes, it does. I mean, you can prune them. It's only the city of Del Mar that it is, quote, illegal to take one out without a letter from somebody like me certifying that the tree is a hazard.
Yeah.
And the one thing is true is, we work around, we arborists anyway, and all of you live around big trees. We all assume at least some degree of risk when we do that. And everybody's risk level and their tolerance is different. But, make sure you call somebody that's utility certified. And tell them that too, and tell Yolanda that, or if you refer them, because they'll want to refer to utility certified companies that can come. And the bids, almost everybody does estimates at no charge. So, call a couple, 3 of them and get competing bids and, see which one you like. At least PTCA members care about what they're doing. They care about proper tree care, so they'll always get proper technique done.